how important the stories and storytelling in communicating. We'll hear more about that from Ed. We're going to formally introduce you shortly, Ed, and really look forward to your presentation. We also have Slava Tutukhin joining us today. Now, Slava is a recent arrival to Sydney, but not a recent arrival to Rotary. Slava, I don't recall how long you've been involved with Rotary, but I wonder whether you might just tell us a little bit about that, Slava, and what it is that has brought you to these shores.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to introduce myself. So I was born in Russia, but it was still Soviet Union, last couple of years of communism in 1999, and graduated from the Ballet Academy in St. Petersburg and worked in Mikhailovsky and Mariinsky Theater. With 19 years old, I decided to move to Germany to pursue my career in Europe for some reason, but looking at what happens now in all the situation, I think it was one of the best decisions for me to move. And I lived in Germany until now for 13 years. I worked as a dancer full-time with Magdeburg Theater, Essen Theater, but also performed in Japan, Korea, Italy, France as a guest artist. Parallel to my dancing career, I was doing my degree in business administration in UK by correspondence. And in 2016, after graduating and also after receiving my German citizenship, I moved to my first management position in Linz, Austria, where I ran the company for 2 years until I was invited to take over Dortmund Ballet Theater and Junior State Company in Dortmund, where I was located basically for the first 5 years. Yes, parallel to my work as in the theater and in the dance environment, I was working with the trade union for artists. You might wonder why this sort of artist trade union exists. In Germany, we have 140 theaters, and 100 at least of them employs dancers. So it's actually quite a big industry, and I was also involved with them for 7 years and participating in the negotiation of sort of contracts in industry contracts for this kind of profession. Yes, unfortunately, I couldn't continue much because I took over the employer role and it was sort of a position against trade union itself, so I had to leave. But in the time, I was also working as an advisor to arbitrator court for German theaters and member of administrator council for the Bavarian pension funds for artists, and a member of the state Northern Westphalia supporting elderly artists. I also organized several international events. Yeah, basically, last year, I was invited to join Tiny Pearson Academy in Sydney as a managing director. And big of my work here will be business development and growth, and also a little bit of a change management, changing the structure. At the same time, I work as independent expert for the European Union, for the Commission, and I analyze a big scale cooperation project between European countries, and as a board member of the Western Australian Youth Ballet, which is a non-profit charitable organization providing elite ballet program in Perth, Western Australia. I came to Rotary when I was 21 years old. It was Rotaract. I was a member of Rotaract Club Essen, District 1900, and later also Rotaract Club Linz in Austria, where I was living District 910. I did a lot of projects. I was their member for 9 years. And at the same time, I also worked a lot in Japan. So I also was involved with Rotaract Club Osaka in Japan, District 2660. I held several presentations with them and did some projects. As soon as I turned 30 years old, I was invited to Rotary Club Dortmund Neutor, where I was working, and many of my friends were in this club, so I joined. Unfortunately, COVID came, and I really couldn't see that many people. We had always online meetings. Until now, they also meet online, but hopefully eventually will stop. In February, we basically moved to Sydney, and I commenced my new working role. And I see basically my personal mission in Sydney is not only to work in the company, but actually to support the development of Sydney performing art industry and community. And, I come from Russia, and arts have a very important role in the country. And I believe arts and education are actually inseparable and complementary. And I want to create opportunities for artists, work closely with audiences, support as government, and find the opportunity to strengthen and broaden local performing arts industry and dance education standards in the next years. So that's little bit of myself. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Slava, for that introduction. And I think we're fortunate to have someone like you working in our performing arts in Australia. We've had in the past members of the club who have operated in that industry, although I don't know that we have too many now. Jeff, you might be able to correct me. So your presence, involvement in our club would be most welcome, and it is a really important part of our community. For expression and entertainment and of course it's a big business, big industry. So yeah, welcome to Sydney. Thank you for joining us here today, and we look forward to seeing more of you, hopefully in person. Look, I think Adrienne, it's time for you to introduce Ed and to get on with the main event. I'll throw over to you.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you so much, Slava. I had no idea what a rich background you had coming into Rotary here in Sydney. So I think we need to have a chat, because I also straddle the divide between the arts and business, and it'd be great to talk about creating more positive impact in the arts space here. But without further ado, I'll get on to introducing my good friend, Ed. But to start, I'd like to pay my respects to any Indigenous people here today, their elders past, present and emerging. And of course, anybody who will be viewing this recording after the fact. We understand that there's a lot of Zoom fatigue at the moment. So there are a lot of people requesting video recordings afterwards, particularly my communications counterparts in other clubs. So no pressure, Ed, but there are a lot of people who are looking to you for some wisdom and guidance as we continue to do service above self. So Ed Coper, he is a leading communications and campaign strategy specialist. His short list of areas of expertise: story-based advocacy and content, grassroots movement building, training and capacity building, campaigning, content production, and political communications. So all of the things that make for a great storyteller, as Ronnie spoke about in her thought of the day. Ed is recognized as a leading expert on communications for impact. He has used cutting-edge storytelling techniques to build social change initiatives, advocacy campaigns, and political movements. He pioneered techniques that harness the power of new media and communications to mobilize and empower movements for impact. From building Australia's largest political movement, Get Up, where we actually met a long time ago, to powering Change.org's global expansion into over 18 countries. Ed's groundbreaking work has featured in several museum exhibitions. Prior to the Center for Impact Communications, Ed founded a New York City-based creative and strategic agency that has serviced multiple Nobel Peace Laureates, political leaders, and grassroots movements, all geared towards creating impact through their communications. He's also the author of Facts and Other Lies, Welcome to the Disinformation Age, which was released earlier this year. We'll touch on that a little bit later. And because that's all not enough, he's also the director of Popularis, which is an organization that brings decades of experience building change-making strategies to engage people for social impact and political engagement. He then takes these impact-based models and work with brands who are ready to future-proof their business by integrating community-minded and socially responsible values into their corporate identity and practice. He's also a keen beer aficionado. So sadly, we can't meet today in person. And he's a doting father of 2 girls who actually look very much like him, and a dear friend. He will have more to share than we have time, so strap yourselves in. We're actually going to have a guided conversation today, of a little bit of a casual Q&A instead of our normal format of a presentation. As usual, we'll open the floor to you all for questions at the end. So please message me your questions directly in the chat function below, and we'll get to those towards the end. Fantastic. Welcome, Ed, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Adri. Thank you, Sydney Rotarians, and thank you, Slava, and everyone here. It's a very, very great pleasure to be able to speak to you today.
Fantastic. So I had quite a lengthy bio, but there was no way to really summarize all of that. Did I miss anything that you'd like to add in there?
I think it was very, very comprehensive and flattering, so I won't mess with that introduction at all.
Fantastic. So I think when we talk about impact communications and the breadth of the work that you do, if you were to explain to somebody in your own words what that looks like, how would you explain that?
Well, I think the best way to introduce it, we've already been helped along by the thought of the day today. It was a perfect example to choose for the topics that I would like to talk to you all about. And you know, we live in a world with many competing ideas, and I know this group in particular is about service, public service. My focus has always been on social justice and, you know, trying to make the world a better place. And communications for impact is really the idea that you do so through telling really compelling stories and help people understand more about the important issues out there in the world and compel them to care about them and take action on them by telling things that inspire them, people that pull at their heartstrings, and inform them at the same time, because that's the best way to spread information and spread ideas. So that's what I've built my career around, trying to work out how to do that more effectively.
Fantastic. So as you can see with Slava and the general conversation here today, Rotarians love a good personal story. And because you found yourself in this very niche area of expertise, I know from my own experience working in a similar space, it's been long and windy and sort of responsive to what's happening around the world. Could you explain to everyone how you got into this field and what were the key moments that led you to become an impact communication specialist?
Well, I suppose one story I could tell, which would predate my birth, but I was really reminded by Slava's introduction, was about my grandfather. And he was born in Prussia, what is now Germany, and in Weimar, Germany, managed one of Berlin's main theatres, the Central Theatre, when Berlin was really at the heart of the cultural capital of Europe. And he was Jewish. And when the Nazi Party came to power, they first assembled a list of all the Jewish musicians in Berlin, and then increasingly made their life more difficult until the point where they raided his theatre. He fled, ultimately landed in Australia, and that's why I'm here today. And the theatre was subsequently bombed during the war and is now a wonderful park in Berlin that I've had the opportunity to go and visit. But that background really led me to be very aware from a young age of issues of social justice, racial justice and persecution, and were very formative in informing my ideals. And at the same time, I was very fortunate in terms of timing, that as I was graduating from university, I was finishing up a law degree with no intention to become a lawyer. The internet was colliding with democracy and politics, and it really forged this brave new world. So I was very fortunate to graduate at that time and to start thinking about my career, and was able to really be at the forefront of using newfangled technology like email to mobilize people, and the internet to tell stories, because the internet allowed people to spread their stories much more easily and effectively than traditionally it was the case. So I cut my teeth trying to use the internet to get David Hicks out of Guantanamo Bay. If people remember, David was imprisoned there without trial for a number of years, which increasingly offended many Australians' sense of due process and justice and normal legal norms. And the kind of techniques we found that were effective there were all using these newfangled online technologies. So that's what began my journey in this niche specialty. It's taken me all around the world. I've been very fortunate to practice in this area for the last decade in New York, but now I'm back in Sydney and enjoying the wonderful quality of life here.
That's amazing. We're very glad to have you back. I was actually a bit surprised when you mentioned that you were coming back to our shores, but I imagine it was an easy decision with everything going on in the US. It's funny you say that you know the use of the newfangled technology that we newly discovered about 10 odd years ago were new to the space. And you talk a lot about those two tools in your book. It's interesting that now, as Rotarians around the world, those two things are probably key to how we stay connected and how we continue our fellowship, particularly during the past couple of years where COVID has really hampered us gathering and being able to do more local campaigning. But I'd love to hear more about the kind of work that you've done, perhaps a highlight or two in your career thus far. You've worked with some of the best thought leaders in the world, including some Nobel laureates, as I mentioned before. Could you give an example of a campaign that you're particularly proud of, or something that was particularly impactful and created a really big social change? And what you and your team did to make this happen?
Yeah, it's a great question, and you know, I was really lucky to travel around the world working on all sorts of different types of campaigns. So I got exposed to all forms of the ways you can try to have social impact on issues, ranging from tiny grassroots movements starting around people's kitchen tables, through to the FIFA Soccer World Cup legacy campaigns, attached to big events like that, and everything in between. And increasingly over the years, I became much more convinced that the most effective way to have impact was through these individual change makers who had really powerful stories and were able to tell their stories to the world. And I was very lucky to get to work with some of the really high-profile examples of those, like Malala Yousafzai, who was shot by the Taliban and has done some amazing work on girls' education, and Greta Thunberg, who's obviously, we all know, really changed the conversation on climate change because it was an issue that was looking for a hero, and it didn't have any individual hero. It was an important issue, and it really does reinforce that idea we were talking about, that you get a good story and people take much more notice. And that's what Greta brought to climate change as an issue. She was a great story, and she became a hero to many people. So some of those experiences really inspired me to start a program where I could work directly with the next generation of these rising, prominent social change makers and individuals, and help them with their story. So I've worked with a lot of the youth climate activists who, like Greta, have been really bringing that moral compass and moral conscience to the issue. I've worked with some really inspiring Rohingya refugees who've had to flee Burma, and other peace activists in Africa, and they all have this one thing in common, which is they have a great personal story, and that's what rallies people to their cause. And so the best way we can have impact on the issues that they work in is actually helping them tell their story and helping more people hear about it.
That's really amazing. And it's very envious that you get to work with and meet the likes of great young people like Malala and Greta. I had two follow-up questions with that. You talked about great personal stories and how these can be really transformational and cut through to people at a values level. What if you had somebody with a great personal story, but didn't have the profile of Malala and Greta? Oftentimes in Rotary, we have a small local hero who's doing great things for their community. And we've often struggled to adequately communicate the impact of what they're doing. Even with our slightly larger projects, for example, we have a project called Give Every Child a Future, which vaccinates children throughout the Pacific. Fantastic program with a regional reach and global implications. How do we tell those kinds of stories? There are local leaders, but they are one of many, and the personal stories there would be very different to the likes of, you know, Greta and Malala, who have, you know, a personal link to the issues they're trying to campaign on.
Yeah, they do, but I'm sure that many of the people that you work with do as well. So Greta's only personal link to the issue of climate change is that she was a resident of planet Earth. And so it's really about finding the way to tell that story is so important. So there was this experiment done by these psychologists in the 1950s or 1960s where they showed participants a simple animation of a square, a triangle, and a circle all moving around each other. And it was nothing more than that, just a square, a circle, and a triangle, creating shapes on the, you know, before them. And they asked people to describe what they saw. And without exception, every single participant told a story about what they saw. And they were very elaborate. They told things like, oh, there's a man who's gone to meet a woman, but it's not his wife. And then the husband comes home and chases him out of the room. And, you know, it's just these very elaborate stories that they had interpreted from just seeing geometric shapes on a page. And the point is that's how our brains work. And this is an evolutionary trick. This is what helped us cooperate, you know, in prehistoric eras, and it formed our societies that we know and have become so powerful today because of our abilities to connect with each other. And the way we do that is we take information that we see in the world and we turn it into a story, whether or not it's a story. Now, we see that some of the unintended consequences of that with a lot of the conspiracy theories that we see spreading around the world during the pandemic. And again, it's this same evolutionary trick that people have been exposed to all this information during the pandemic, and they want to make a story out of it because that's what our brains do with information. So they are inventing stories that aren't true. You know, that there's a big global conspiracy responsible for a lot of these random events that we see. But again, it's just because our brains really want to do that. So the challenge when you're working on a campaign is to wrap up the information that you have in a campaign in a way that our brain wants to receive it. And our brain doesn't like bullet point policy points. They don't like scientifically peer-reviewed articles. We don't like statistics, even though we see it all the time. We want the individual to say, this is my story, and this is what this issue means to me. So if you're talking about a childhood vaccination campaign in the Pacific, then what does it mean to people's lives, that campaign? Where is a person who can tell you that without this program, their life would have been very different, and what it really meant to them, or what their community means to them, and how childhood vaccinations are protecting their community? And that's what our brains want to hear about. That we want to have an emotional appeal to connect to, and we want to find a common shared value with that person. And maybe it's as a parent. You know, we might be a parent in Sydney and we can connect with someone who's a parent in the Pacific because we all want to look after the health of our kids. And that we do that through well-told stories that, and you don't have to be a personality. You know, Greta and Malala weren't global celebrities until they started telling their compelling stories. Those things happen in that order. So you can make you can make anyone who has genuinely held conviction about something into a compelling story, and that's the way you'll really win support for their issue.
Fantastic. I think there are some really excellent key points there for us to take away as we have a chat about the campaigns that we're running and leading as Rotary Sydney, and how we galvanize other clubs around those campaigns, but also communicating their impact to the broader public to garner their support financially or through action. We have a couple of follow-up questions from the audience. I have one from Thelma, actually, who asks, what is the difference between an individual personal story and an organizational personal story? Which I think is interesting, because a lot of the themes that you talked about are probably applicable to both. But do you have comments on that to share?
Yeah, there's this great communications expert called Marshall Gantz at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, and he's got this theory that you would have heard without realizing you were hearing it, because Barack Obama took his theory and in 2008 and based his campaign communications off it. And in this theory, you tell a story by firstly telling the story of self, and that is something about you, some story, some anecdote. I did it with you all with the anecdote about my grandfather. You know, it's something that you can better understand me by, and then that builds a connection with the audience. And then you tell the story of us, which is, how is that related to the shared values of your audience and of your community? And then you tell the story of now, which is about the urgency of the moment we live in. So what are we going to do with these shared values? What action are we going to take together to have some outcome? So for Barack Obama, it looked like saying, you know, I was a community organizer from the South Side of Chicago, or, you know, I was raised by a single mom, or, you know, whatever element of his personal story. And it taught me that, you know, people are the strongest when we're working together. You know, that's connecting everyone in the audience. You say everyone here now shares that value. We want a better country, and so we're going to work together to win this election and deliver change on the things we care about. That's the story of now. So very simple thing, but he was following this established theory. And organizations can do this too. It's just the way in which we talk about the work that we do. So Rotary has an amazing story. It has shared values with its community, and it's working on issues in the present. So you can follow that same kind of narrative structure that Obama did in 2008. There's another communications guy who's relevant for this called Jonah Sachs, and he wrote a book called Winning the Story Wars. And he broke down the structure of a good story by saying that every good story has a hero, a mentor, and a gift that the mentor gives the hero. So in Star Wars, for example, the hero is Luke Skywalker. The mentor might be Obi-Wan Kenobi. And he gives, or Yoda, and he gives Luke Skywalker the Force, you know, as the gift. And then the hero's journey is one where guided by the mentor, the hero takes the gift and affects some change or solves some problem. And you might recognize that kind of narrative arc from pretty much any good story. I could have chosen Star Wars, I could have chosen something else. They all have those common features. And one of the problems that a lot of organizations fall into is that when they tell the story of their organization, they think they're the hero. But in that narrative, the organization should always be the mentor, and the hero is someone else. You as a Rotary, you are giving, maybe it's your members, some gift that they are able to use to affect change in your campaigns. So you want to make the person, you know, the member or the audience that you're talking to, you want to make sure that you're always making them the hero of your story. not putting the organization as a hero of the story. And in that way, when people see those stories, they're really drawn to take that action because they will associate positively with Rotary and be inspired by the mentorship role that you're playing in that story, and be a part of that action that you're driving. So just think of yourselves as Obi-Wan Kenobi or Yoda is the take-home message from that.
I love the Star Wars reference, Ed. I'm just putting some links to some of those references that Ed mentioned. So Marshall Gans and Jonah Sachs. They are actually two books that I cut my teeth on early on in the game when I started my career in campaigning and communications. So wholly recommend you having a read of those to get a fuller understanding of the frameworks that Ed was talking about today and how you might apply those in your own projects and in your own communications. Being mindful of the time so we can have some more audience questions, I now wanted to turn towards your book, Ed. So I can see that it's in the background there, just under the plant, where it says facts in big font. So I read in the Sydney Morning Herald that Pat Scheel described it as you taking us on a tour of the dark side of the web. So the dark side of those newfangled technologies that you mentioned earlier, and how innocuous tools can be misused for nefarious purposes, but also just for their non-intended purpose. So from your website, it says, from fringe conspiracy theories to alternative facts, a timely look at how we arrived in the fake news era. Would your younger self believe the news of today? An entire city block blown up by a suicide bomber on Christmas Day because he believed phone towers spread disease. The Prime Minister of Australia employing the wife of his friend who fronts a group the FBI has declared terrorists. A global pandemic, which even as they lie dying from it, people refuse to believe exists. And it says there that many who sat in shocked disbelief as these events beamed around the world asked the same question: how did we get here? Facts and Other Lies puts fake news in its historical context and explains how disinformation has fractured society, even threatening democracy itself. It explains why disinformation is so potent and so hard to stop, and what we can do to help prevent its proliferation in Australia, where politicians and shock jocks are already operating from the same dark playbook. It outlines how anyone can diffuse disinformation in the home, office, or pub, or wherever the deluded gather to spread their nonsense. So Rotarians, be prepared. This is a very timely release of the book and very brave to tackle these kinds of topics. I guess from our perspective, what prompted you to write a book about this subject? Why now in particular, as you know, we've seen these events happen over the past couple of years? And you know, from a storytelling perspective, what tools did you just tell us about how to create great personal stories are being employed by the other side to proliferate this trend of disinformation?
Yes, well, you know, I mentioned earlier that, you know, I was lucky to be working on campaigns when the internet arrived, and it was quite a liberating force for good, because it leveled the playing field and allowed people to connect to each other, access information and share information in a really open way. But something has changed since that point of time, and the internet is not a level playing field anymore. The level of information out there is so great that we cede control of our information diets to the algorithms of social media. So what that means is we get our opinions now from someone else making a choice, or rather a line of computer code making a choice about what we should see and what information we should get. So a lot of people are turning away from traditional news as a source of information and really just scrolling through their Facebook or Twitter feed to get their information. And this has had a large unintended consequence. And that is, it makes it very susceptible to manipulation. And it's for all of those reasons that we talked about why stories are so effective, is that people who are telling disinformation and misinformation wrap up their disinformation in really compelling stories, and that gets favored on social media. So social media platforms want to find the most engaging thing to show you, the thing that pulls your heartstrings, gets an emotional reaction, or reinforces something that you already think that you're likely to agree with. And so that means that you get shown things that are quite often not true, but will guarantee to get a reaction out of you. And en masse, it's created this situation where everyone's getting their own information. They're put into filter bubbles that shields them from any counter information, and only gives them what they already think, and whips them into a frenzy about it. So that's a real problem if you, say, have some fringe opinion about vaccines, and rather than ever being exposed to any information about the safety of vaccines, you're only exposed to information that reinforces your view. That might be a conspiracy theory, or might be based on someone trying to sell you alternate remedies or just make a quick buck, because that's what a lot of disinformation does. So it's really changed our relationship with the truth, and it's having a lot of these harmful unintended consequences. And it also makes that, someone like me who tries to use the internet to get information and facts to people, our job became a lot harder in the last few years because the information ecosystem changed for the worse, and it's a lot harder to get information to people than it used to be. So that's why I thought it was time that people had a resource that they could better understand how the situation occurred, and more importantly, what they can do about it.
Fantastic. I think, looking at the time, this might be a good segue for us to open up to the floor, particularly as we've now talked about what powerful storytelling and personal stories look like, and what that looks like when we're using it for good and using it for disinformation. So we have a question from one of our members, Shiva. Shiva, would you like me to ask your question, or would you like to ask it? Because I think it's an interesting one that segues to a question about what you do in gray area situations. I see you've unmuted, so I'll add the spotlight with you and you can ask it.
Thanks, Adrian. You were involved with David Hicks, and that was obviously successful. Julian Assange, he's locked up for reasons of being a credible journalist. It is not in the front pages anymore. Both political parties prefer not to speak. Obviously, they've got reasons to different unethical reasons. How would you tackle that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think that what made us successful in the David Hicks campaign was not making it about David Hicks, but about finding other values that were bigger than him and were important to Australians, and making the campaign about that. So we never wanted to get involved in an argument about who he was or what he had done, whether he was right or wrong. Was he a terrorist or was he not a terrorist? That's not the ground that we were interested in talking about. We're interested in talking about the rights of all Australians, regardless of who they are, regardless of what they've done and what situations they find themselves in. There are certain principles of the rule of law and due process that everyone is entitled to in Australia, regardless of who they are. So by making it about universal shared values and not about who he was as a person, we avoided the arguments about that. And I think that it would be my advice with the Julian Assange campaign as well. I think people get very bogged down in arguing about who he is as a person, what he's done, whether it was right or wrong, whether he is a journalist or a hacker. All of these things are going to alienate some people at the same time as winning support with others. I think the key thing is to make it about the universal principles. So is this a freedom of speech issue, a freedom of the press, the rights of all people to have transparent government and no information about them? Those are the things that are universal, that people will be more comfortable in coming out in support of and in defense of, rather than arguing about the specifics of his case. And so I think there are quite a lot of parallels between the David Hicks campaign and Julian Assange's situation, that there could be some valuable lessons there.
Thank you so much, Ed. I think there is a theme here that connecting back to values is what makes a story powerful, because we can then all connect with those shared values. With Rotary, we have a 4-way test that we measure everything against. Our actions, our campaigns, and the kinds of projects that we run. I imagine this is the kind of values that we need to instill in the storytelling that we create outside of Rotary. So thank you so much for your question, Shiva. Next, we have Slava. So I will add him to the mix.
Can I ask a question? Okay. Yeah, it's very exciting what you do. I actually have a quick question about educational side of it. So look, you said that information being played with, obviously, when I was going to school in Russia, I learned different type of history from what I've learned when I came to Germany, and the moment when you follow up different stories online, or if you do academics and you try to Google some information, you obviously receive a lot of different kind of information, some of it like complete rubbish. Do you think there are some forms of education, or did you hear something about like programs that may be implemented in universities or in some levels that educate people how to actually research the right information and have access to it?
Yeah, absolutely. A great question, Slava. I think this is the big solution that we need to do in the long term. It doesn't help so much in the short term when you're trying to address specific disinformation, but we're living in a different era at the moment than we were previously, and we see some high-profile examples of obviously the conflict in Ukraine at the moment is one where people are having a lot of difficulty sorting information from disinformation. Or the pandemic, something new comes along and people have to decide which information is legitimate and which information is illegitimate. That's very hard to do on social media because our brains are geared to assume everything we see is truthful. And so the best thing we can do is to teach students how to inhabit this new information environment that we live in, to build those skills. So when I was a history student at high school, I was taught how to evaluate historical sources. Is this biased? What is the source? What is the motive of this writer? What is the context around it? And those are really valuable skills that I carried with me through adulthood. And we need to be taking the same approach and embedding into a high school curriculum and also at university digital media literacy, so that people understand how information is manipulated, what to look out for, and how to do a good job of assessing information themselves. It's also relevant to many more issues like cyberbullying, You know, this is a new era that kids who are growing up now have to learn. That I don't have the skills because I didn't have social media when I was a kid because it didn't exist. So I have a lot of trouble, telling a kid how to navigate being in high school when everyone's on social media, because those are new skills that I was never taught. So we need to, this is a much bigger problem than just disinformation. But in terms of disinformation, it's key to make sure that digital media literacy is a big part of the curriculum.
Thank you, Slava. We're now coming to an end, so perfect timing. President Mark has a great question for us to wrap up with. Malcolm Turnbull actually read the book and said, COPA definitely shows us what is to be done. So President Mark, I will add you to the spotlight so you can ask our final question, which I think ties up everything nicely.
Yeah, look, I think after your response there, Ed, it's more of a comment because, I was with Sam Michael on Saturday night at a function, and he's an Aussie who was the chief engineer of the McLaren Formula One racing team. And he made the point on Saturday night that he would read articles about what they were doing at McLaren, and they were complete rubbish. Absolutely no truth to it whatsoever. But then when he'd read an article from, the same journalist, the same publication about Ferrari, he would take it as gospel. A highly educated man, a well-paid person, and he had this dilemma about, how you were talking about there, about how you decide, what stuff to believe and what stuff you don't. So I don't know that you need to add to that, but that was just something that, I was thinking about at that time. So thank you for your presentation, Ed. I am going to invite Jeff Wilbo, I believe, to give our vote of thanks. Over to you, Mr. Wilbo.
Thanks, Mark, and thank you, Adri, for introducing Ed. Ed, thank you for coming today and to talking to us, but I guess more important, thank you for what you do. We need people like you who are prepared to campaign on issues. My one request of you is please stay on the light side. I would be terrified if someone with your skills went to the dark side. I think that would be frightening. And of course, then I think, well, of course, there are lots of people with those kind of skills who are on the dark side. So we need people like you. So thank you. Of course, what you say is thought-provoking, particularly for an organisation like ours that, and I think some people in the club are sick of me saying it, but we run some incredible programs, scholarship programs, immunisation programs in the Pacific, police citizen boys club programs, rural community. We run a peace group, more recently a climate action group. And getting the message across is something that we struggle with, like so many of our organisations. And I take your point. Maybe we do concentrate too much on the organisation rather than on the message. So thank you for that. One of the programs that has been mentioned during this course is what we call Rotary Give Every Child a Future, immunising 100,000 children across 9 Pacific Island countries. And we did that as part of our centenary. We will make a donation on your behalf to that program to thank you for coming today. And I just let people know that, look, this is immunising people against rotavirus, pneumococcal and HPV, the things that our kids get immunised against as a matter of course, but they're just not happening in the Pacific. So it's an outstanding program that is helping people we will never meet in a most meaningful way. So that's going on. It was part of our centenary project. And for club members, I let you know that we have raised about 80% of the $5 million we needed to do that. So we still need your help because we've still got to get over that final 20%. But the program is on budget and is working. So come on board, and remember, $45 will do one child, but why not do 10 with $450 donation? One other thing we did during the Royal Australian Mint did on our behalf for our centenary was produce some commemorative coins. And Ed, we would like to send you a Mint $1 coin produced by the Royal Australian Mint to celebrate the centenary of Rotary in Australia. And I'm sure Adri can provide me with one of those old-fashioned postal address things, and we'll get that to you in the mail, just as a memento from Rotary and a thank you for being here. So thank you very much, Ed, and back to you, Mark. Thank you.